Good evening, Sherry, Tammy, Ray, and whoever else we have right now. We'll wait just a couple of moments and see if some other folks have a chance to join us here. Okay, well, we're going to go. It's almost 2 minutes of dead air already, so I guess we'll go. We're in Genesis chapter 31 this evening. This chapter is pretty lengthy and has a lot of significance in terms of foreshadowing the Exodus, but also looking back to the calling of Abraham, Sarah, and then basically family issues and a lot of things going on here, really. So it will probably take us at least 2 weeks to get through it. It might even take a third week. I know that thrills everybody, but we'll go through it. We'll see how we do. Genesis chapter 31, and we're going to start with the first 16 verses. Good to know Wally and Thelma are here with us, and we're praying for Thelma right now. Genesis chapter 31, verses 1 through 16. Now Jacob heard the words of Laban's sons, saying, Jacob has taken away all that was our father's, and from what belonged to our father he has made all this wealth. Jacob saw the attitude of Laban, and behold, it was not friendly toward him as formerly. Then the Lord said to Jacob, Return to the land of your fathers and to your relatives, and I will be with you. So Jacob sent and called Rachel and Leah to his flock in the field, and said to them, I see your father's attitude, that is not friendly toward me as formerly, but the God of my father has been with me. You know that I have served your father with all my strength. Yet your father has cheated me and changed my wages 10 times. However, God did not allow him to hurt me. If he spoke thus, the speckled shall be your wages, then all the flock brought forth speckled. And if he spoke thus, the striped shall be your wages, then all the flock brought forth striped. Thus God has taken away your father's livestock and given them to me. And it came about at the time when the flock were mating that I lifted up my eyes, and I saw in a dream, and behold, the male goats were mating. The male goats which were mating were striped, speckled, and mottled. Then the angel of God said to me in the dream, Jacob, and I said, Here I am. And he said, Lift up now your eyes and see that all the male goats which are mating are striped, speckled, and mottled. For I have seen all that Laban has been doing to you. I am the God of Bethel, where you anointed a pillar, where you made a vow to me. Now arise, leave this land, and return to the land of your birth. Rachel and Leah said to him, Do we still have any portion or inheritance in our father's house? Are we not reckoned by him as foreigners? For he has sold us, and has also entirely consumed our purchase price. Surely all the wealth which God has taken away from our father belongs to us and our children. Now then, do whatever God has said to you. Okay. It's good to know PD and Robin are here as well. So we have a difficult beginning to this passage. The breakup between between Jacob and Laban will be a difficult, awkward, really kind of an ugly scenario. It's whenever family members end up fighting over money, it's never really a pretty thing. Hi, Mindy. And that's what we have here. We have the ascension of Jacob financially and in every other way, and coming at the expense of Laban and his family. And, this isn't a case where a rising tide lifts all ships or anything like this. This is very clearly Jacob prospering at the expense of his uncle and father-in-law. And, Laban has sons of his own, and they see this happening, and they're not particularly happy about it. It's wealth being, in a sense, plundered from one generation, one family, and going to a son-in-law, not even a son. And that makes things difficult, makes things awkward, brings in animosity between. Thank you for the different terminology for the animals there, Sherry. The resentment from Laban's sons at seeing their father's wealth and their inheritance diminished and going to their brother-in-law is, I think, a very relatable experience for most folks in our culture today. The story of wealth redistributing among the family towards and away from the primary male inheritors towards someone else is all too common. And I mean, by that, I don't mean to say that it should never happen. I mean to say it's something that far too often causes a great deal of resentment in families. It's something that can be, I guess, we try to deal with it in terms of estate planning and wills and maybe giving things away while we're alive and trying to be more even-handed. Today, we're maybe a little more aware of it than they even cared about it to be back then. But one of the things is this is not just sharp dealing by Jacob. This is not just fortuitous events and sound animal husbandry bringing this about. This is very clearly the will of God happening. We mentioned last week in chapter 30 the kind of strange forms of animal husbandry that Jacob was practicing, and that it wasn't necessarily told to him by God to do that. In this chapter, Jacob does claim that God has in fact sanctioned this, authorized this, in fact prescribed this, and brought this about. So it's a difficult story on that level, and one that maybe you're familiar with in your own family dealings, but also I think perhaps more relevant in our culture today, and equally difficult is how Rachel and Leah see their relationship with their father. I have had people, and maybe some of y'all have done this, and I don't know that I've ever done. I've made a lot of mistakes in teaching and preaching in my life, so I'm not trying to say I'm flawless on this. But this is one mistake I don't think I've ever made, and that is to somehow or other try to justify the selling of daughters into marriage. It was a cultural thing. It was going on for a very long time, and they're not the only ones doing this. We take some biblical stories that indicate the love and the duration of the marriages, and we also look at maybe the divorce rate in our current culture, and we try to justify this and say, see, it lasts just as long, or they're married forever after this arranged marriage and all of that. And there are a lot of cultural factors in play when you look at that sort of thing. But if you think the women liked it, certainly that they always liked it. I think you can see from this story right here that they didn't always like it anyway. And in this case, we can see particularly Laban's greed or disregard for his daughter's wishes made an impression. It's good to know Ann and Darius are watching as well. Thank you, Mindy. You can see the impression that they made, the lasting impression that when Jacob is ready to go, the Lord is calling him. He's worn out his welcome with his in-laws, and he's now had Joseph. So it's time to get back to the family, his family, and begin life truly. The story of Israel, if you will, the fate of the nation, the fate of the family, his family, him being the true head of the household instead of serving a different head of the household. He will be the head of the household. To see as that is happening, now that's happening, we see that he goes to his wives, who are sisters, daughters of the same man, and explains the scenario to them and says, this is what's happening. Yeah, I got all your dad's money. Basically, I have your dad's wealth, but God wanted me to have it. This was God's plan all along, was for me to acquire the wealth of your father, and it will come at the expense of your brothers. Your brothers aren't too happy with me right now. And we see the disconnect that occurs between the daughters and their father. And it gets worse later on in the chapter, I think. One of the saddest stories, in a sense, in the whole Bible. And the daughter's response to Jacob's explanation and story, it doesn't reflect, I don't think, a tremendous amount of faith in God, or faith that God is moving in a certain way and this is the will of God. It is very much a cold financial arm's length transaction, or financial way of looking at this. And they don't look at Jacob necessarily and see God blessing Jacob. They see God redeeming them, which is, I guess, one good way of looking at it, that they see their lot in life as truly tied to their husband. But there is resentment towards their father in the way they were married off. Leah didn't get a husband that truly wanted her, that truly desired her. Rachel did not get her husband before her sister got her husband. So in some ways, they're both second place. Leah is first place chronologically, and Rachel is first place affectionately. But that means Leah is second place affectionately, and Rachel is second place chronologically. So in a sense, they both win. In a sense, they both lose, and they seem to be coming out of it focused on their losses rather than on the win that they had, that they're so happy to be married to this chosen son of God, this chosen vessel. And Jacob is certainly a son of God, certainly not the son of God, but a son of God. Chosen one chosen to bless the whole world, as Abraham, his grandfather, Isaac, his father was, and now Jacob. And that wonderful status and that favor that's being poured out upon God is not so much something that Rachel and Leah rejoice in as it is a vindication of them against their father, because of the choices, because of the way their father treated them as they became women and as they got married, the sharp dealing. And it just shows that the women in this culture they had to endure a lot. And sometimes we'll glass over it and say, well, they didn't really have any higher expectations, or this was the best way it could possibly be under the time. And maybe some of those assessments are true, but that doesn't change the fact that they're fully human beings, and what happens to them affects how they feel about things. It affects how they see things. You can't treat people like dirt, basically. You can't treat them like cattle. You can't treat them like something to be bought and sold and think that, well, that's just what they're used to. They're not going to mind it at all. This is their expectation in life. It's not Rachel and Leah's expectation. They feel like they have been wronged and are, through their husband and through God's dealings with their husband, now being vindicated against the one who wronged them, and that one was their father. Now, thinking about how Rachel and Leah feel about the relationship, feel about how things have gone, one can only imagine how Bilhah and Zilpah feel about it and how they look at Rachel and Leah. I mean, Rachel and Leah were daughters of a wealthy, powerful man who was arranged, and they were arranged into a marriage with another wealthy, powerful man. Bilhah and Zilpah are slaves. And they were given. They weren't sold. They were given along with their wives, their mistresses. They were given away to someone that was not their husband. In a sense, they never get to truly be wives. They are concubines, lesser wives at some extent, but the feelings that Jacob has for both Rachel and Leah are discussed. There is no discussion of how Jacob feels about Bilhah and Zilpah. And it doesn't matter how he feels about them, and it doesn't matter how they feel about him in the story. And the fact that it doesn't matter should matter to us. It should impact us, because we know God is a God of the oppressed. He's a God of the downtrodden, the ones who are victimized in this world. He has not forgotten them. But this is their measure of comfort that they receive, that they are the mothers of tribes in Israel. But if Rachel and Leah resented their father, you can imagine how Bilhah and Zilpah feel about the whole relationship. That just because that they're slaves, that this is somehow okay. That they were fine with it. I don't know where we get that sometimes. It was maybe the best they could have hoped for or expected. Now, in a theological sense, moving back from kind of the personal plight of the characters of the story and moving kind of into a theological sense, one of the things the Bible does frequently is repeat a theme. One story foreshadows another story, and it doesn't just kind of set it up to happen, but it gives it a significance, a context, that when it is repeated, you look back at that story and you can take from it and see these two things connect one to another. These things have, God is working in both things. You see God moving in a consistent manner towards the redemption of his people. And this story of Jacob's fleeing from this danger has a lot of parallels with both the story of Abraham and Sarah leaving their family, but also it has a lot of parallels with the story of Israel leaving Egypt in the Exodus. It has both. It sounds in both history and the future for Israel at this point. Abraham leaves his family with Sarah. They leave barren. They leave without child. They leave with no heir. And they leave with Abraham's nephew. Good luck with that. But they leave without heir. Jacob is not going to leave without heir. But he is leaving, in a sense, to uncertainty. And the uncertainty involves primarily, he's got to, when he goes back home, he's going to go back to his big brother, and his big brother's not happy with him. So there is some danger. There is some uncertainty in the future. It sounds like the Exodus, in the sense, primarily, that Israel doesn't just leave Egypt. God does not just simply emancipate Israel from Egyptian slavery. He doesn't just issue an emancipation proclamation. You're no longer slaves. You can leave now. He uses the plagues, particularly the 10th plague, to convince the Egyptians that it is in their best interest to get rid of the Israelites, to get rid of the Hebrews, and the Egyptians enrich. The wealthiest empire the world had seen at that point enriches Israel. The Israelites plunder Egypt on their way out. They leave with the Egypt's wealth. Because if your children are getting killed, you will pay anything to get rid of what's killing them, right? If you have a sick child and you go to the doctor and the doctor says, your child is dying, I can save him if I give him this treatment. Your first question is not going to be, well, how much is this treatment going to cost me? Your first question is going to be, when can we get him that treatment? Or when can we get her that treatment? And that's how Egypt looked at it. Our children died. How do we get them from out of here? How do we get the source of their death out of our midst where we won't lose more lives, whatever it costs? So just as Israel plunders Egypt on its way out, Jacob has plundered Laban on his way out. And, it's not going to go easily. It's not going to go comfortably. There's going to be pursuit, and we'll look at that probably next week. Just as there was pursuit, Pharaoh goes after Israel after they are turned loose, after they start the exodus towards the Red Sea. Pharaoh pursues. But that's a typical treatment of an idea or a theme with the Bible, that when you look at one of these stories, you're going to see things that remind you in the past and also foreshadow in the future. But before we move on from these verses, I want to come back to this whole family squabbling over money thing. And I want to do it because I think it's something that we can get drawn into so very easily in the church concept. As the church is a family, our members sometimes go through these things where they're maybe in a dispute over their parents' estate or something like that happens. And if you feel like you're being wronged by your brother or sister, you may turn to your brother or sister in Christ for comfort, for guidance, for wisdom. How can I not just overcome this? How can I remain faithful to God through this? But more, how can I get my share of the money? What's the wisest course of action? And trying to be helpful and trying to be people who want to see justice done, perhaps. We may offer some advice. Well, go hire this lawyer I know because he's really good at that. He represented me or my cousin or something like that. We try to help them actually acquire the wealth that they think they're entitled to. And maybe they legally are. I don't know. One of my favorite stories in Jesus is about Jesus is a story not in what he does and what he doesn't do. In Luke chapter 12, verse 13, someone comes up to him and says, I'm having a family dispute over an inheritance. Help me get what is owed to me. And there's a lot of ways Jesus displays his wisdom. And perhaps this is the greatest display of wisdom in the entire ministry of Jesus Christ, because he says, I'm staying out of it. I'm not the judge. Don't drag me into this. There is no winning. Absolutely no winning. I promise you, no winning in that kind of dispute as a judge. You do not want to be in the midst. You are going to make somebody angry no matter what you do. Even Jesus knew there was no winning. I can't win here. So I'm not getting in it. Instead, he follows it up with the parable of the rich fool who tears down his barns and builds bigger barns because he's got so much going on, so much wealth, and he's going to keep it and save it for himself and give himself a comfortable life. This is considered to be a warning against every kind of greed. Sometimes we look at wealthy people and think of them as being very materialistic, very greedy, centering on what their money will buy them and how they can have these things. And maybe that what that money buys them is just tremendous peace of mind, that they don't have to worry about money. They have an abundance of wealth. So much we're comfortable, we're not worried about it. And we think of that as greed or materialism. But poor people can be greedy and materialistic as well. Poor people can maybe at a different price point, but still focus on little signs of wealth. I can't have the big mansion and everything else, but I can have those $300 pair of basketball shoes, something like that. I can put them on layaway and, pay them off over time. I can do this, that, or the other. I can have something that is disproportionately expensive to its actual value and makes it look like, to me, look like I am to everyone else, looks like I am wealthy. I have something they all covet and they all desire, even though I'm not really a particularly wealthy person. Poor people also have to really guard against materialism. And I'm not talking about hoping you have enough food to eat and clothes on your back and adequate shelter and all of that. I'm talking about coveting. It's hard to covet something you already have, isn't it? I mean, we covet what we don't have, and poor people a lot of times don't have very much. So it's Jesus, when he warns and he tells this parable, he's warning against all forms of greed. And perhaps he is telling the person who feels like they're being wronged that you're exactly like the person who is wronging you. By obsessing over this, by seeking retribution or recompense for this, you are the very opposite side of the exact same coin, the opposite side of a very flawed coin. You are focusing on wealth. Even if you get that, even if you acquire your share of it, what are you going to do with it? Are you now going to tear down your barns and build bigger barns? If I win the Powerball lottery, what am I going to do with it? Am I going to tear down my barns and build bigger barns? If I get the wealth back that I feel my brother-in-law has stolen from my family, what am I going to do with it? If he doesn't steal it, there's a good chance someone else will steal it. And even if I get it, and I get what I want, the material things I want with it, that very night, your soul may be required of you. That may be your last thing you do on earth. So, rather than wade into this family squabble, Jesus says, I'm out of it. I'm not getting into that. My people I call my people to not focus on material things, that God will give you what you need. And with that, if the Lord is your portion, you will be content and you will be happy, happier than those who seek wealth at every turn and at every expense, who are willing to burn their family to get wealthy, who are willing to burn their friends to get wealthy, or the people who are so burned by it that they can't think of anything else. So Jesus, of course, as he always does, offers a godly alternative to how people normally interact over these things. But ultimately, that's not the point of this story. This story is not so much about how you keep your family together when you have generational wealth, or how you deal with loss or gain. This story is a sign, an indication that God is truly with Jacob, and it's shown materially. It is shown in the wealth that he has acquired at the expense of a nearby relative, one who's not in the primary family of faith, but one who's closely akin to it. He takes that wealth from them and gives it. God takes the wealth of Laban and gives it to Jacob. So there was a lot of times with where Laban could have been probably more honest with Jacob. There were a lot of times that Jacob could have been a better son to his parents and a better brother to Esau. This isn't about weighing out who deserves what. This is about understanding that God's will be done in spite of the flaws of both sides of an argument, despite the shortcomings that we both manifest, those who have and those who have not. God, in this story, this is about showing favor to Jacob to an extent where even if it hurts Laban's family, God will favor Jacob. Okay. Let's now look at verses 17 through 21. Jacob arose and put his children and his wives upon camels, and he drove away all his livestock and all his property which he had gathered. He acquired livestock which he had gathered in Paddan Aram to go to the land of Canaan to his father Isaac. When Laban had gone to shear his flock, then Rachel stole the household idols that were her father's. And Jacob deceived Laban the Aramean by not telling him that he was fleeing. So he fled with all that he had, and he arose and crossed the Euphrates River and set his face toward the hill country of Gilead. Okay. So Jacob is making his escape. He's making his departure. And we've seen already in some of these stories that when one person is departing, there's always this invitation. I think particularly comes to mind that when Rebecca is offered the chance by Abraham's slave to come back and be Isaac's wife, her parents, and including Laban, who was her brother, they want Rebecca to remain for a time to kind of say goodbye properly and all of that. And they want to have their farewells to Rebecca. And Rebecca ends up leaving with Abraham's servant immediately. So there's that foreshadows this a little bit. Jacob knows that the longer he hangs around, the worse it's going to be. He has the advantage in that he has Laban's daughters ready to go. They're ready to move. And he has the wealth in his possession. And the farther he can get away from Laban, the more legitimate, the more secure the wealth, Laban's wealth will be in Jacob's hands. So it's time to get up and it's time to go They were living in proximity to each other, but not absolutely right next to each other. They weren't in each other's business all the time. So Jacob is trying to separate himself from his father-in-law, and wisely crosses the river. Whenever you're trying to make an escape, don't come to the river and stop and say, "Oh, we'll cross it in the morning." Go ahead and cross the river. You want to be on the proper side of the river when you're moving for speed. And he wanted that river between him and his father-in-law. But again, the first part of one of I think the saddest stories in the whole Bible really is the fact that Rachel goes back to steal her father's idols. It's sad that Laban has the idols, but again, remember, Laban is not in the primary family of faith, and the whole world right then. I mean, it's hard to really assert the prominence of any level of monotheism. It just really wasn't. Laban is probably as polytheistic, meaning he believed in many gods. As much as anyone. He may believe in the God of Abraham, Isaac, and now Jacob, but he's going to believe probably in other gods. And if not, you have the idols anyway, because they're probably made out of precious metals and precious stones, and they're worth a lot anyway. So he has these idols, and Rachel goes to her father's house and steals them. Taking them, I mean, you're already taking the flocks and the herds and all of that. You're already getting that and making that financial windfall yours by fleeing. And she kind of gets the cherry on top and goes and gets her father's idols from him, and they flee. Again, this also foreshadows the departure of Israel from Egypt, the plundering. You're taking him right out of their household. She goes into his tent, gets his idols. Home invasion, I guess you could call it. And it's a very sad part of this story, and it gets sadder. It's not the end of the sadness of the story. It gets even sadder. When people name their children after biblical characters, and I'm not criticizing anybody with this name or doing it or whatever. It's interesting if you go back and read the story of the person that they've named their child after. You can't go back in the Bible and find the story of Rick. Okay, my parents did not choose biblical names for their kids, so we're kind of exempt for that, and none of us have a biblical name, first or second name. But Rachel is a very common name among people of faith, and they're thinking. I think back to this story, and I've known a few Leahs too, and I think we have a Leah amongst our midst, and we're glad to have her and all of that. But when you go back, and there's been Rebecca's and all of these Sarahs certainly, and I have a cousin named Sarah. So when you go back and you look at the stories of these biblical characters, you can usually find some flaws, and you think, why did they name this child after this person? But and I've kind of wondered that about Rachel so many times. If people read the story of Rachel before they named their daughter Rachel. But Rachel is a beautiful name, and she is the favored wife of Jacob, and she is the mother of Joseph and the mother of Benjamin, the two favored sons of Jacob. So I guess on that level, it's understandable. But this becomes, I think, again, one of the saddest stories. We'll dwell on it more next week. But it's really a hard story. I really, and maybe I'm being too hard on Rachel. Maybe my misogyny is showing through, because Jacob has, in a sense, been stealing all along. But I think I've been pretty harsh on Jacob anyway. And again, the story is not so much about right and wrong morally and who is more right and who is more wrong. The story is more about God favoring his chosen ones over and above even their family members. So, but most of the time when the blessings come, the favored men, the called men, the patriarchs, are favored in a sense passively. When Abraham plunders Pharaoh, Pharaoh gives gladly to Abraham. So it just kind of comes his way, even though Abraham lies, he comes to him. Here, Rachel is actually going into her father's house and taking something that belonged to him. And I don't know. It's a really sad and a hard story, I feel like. Again, it sounds, foreshadows the departure of Israel from the land of Egypt later on. Okay. Well, I want to wrap it up there. We are next week we'll spend a lot of time talking about the Rachel and Laban encounter here. And anyway, we'll do that next time. I hope you're all doing well this week. And for our announcements and everything, please look at our Facebook and check your emails. And we're trying to keep everybody in the loop on what's going on. And we may have some other news coming before too long. Who knows? So let's close this with a prayer and have a good rest of your week. Father, we are thankful for the stories of your servants as they followed your calling. And Lord, give us wisdom as we look at these stories. Help us see these flawed human beings as people to be honored to an extent, learned from to a much greater extent, but also see in them how their limitations did not keep you from using them, and how blessed we are and how fortunate we are that we do not follow these people, but we follow your Son, Jesus, in whom there was nothing but honesty and integrity, who sought to bless rather than to steal, who came to give life rather than take it. And in his name we pray. Amen. Okay. Thank you for your attention tonight. Be careful out there. And we hope to see you soon.